Naomi, it's okay. I'm here.
Why is she doing this? You made a good decision to marry this nobody. Look at you. I've defeated you.
There are moments in life when a single decision changes everything. A signature on a document. A phone call in the middle of the night. This was a story about power. About what happens when money becomes more important than family. And about a woman who was pushed to her breaking point by the very people who should have protected her. What makes this story unforgettable is that the person everyone laughed at turned out to be the one person who had been holding all the cards from the very beginning. Welcome to Threshtail Stories, where every stories feel real. Enjoy the stories, bestie. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. At 36 years old, Naomi Brooks believed the hardest chapter of her life had already passed. Growing up in Atlanta, Georgia, she had always been close to her father, Raymond Brooks, a respected businessman who spent decades building a successful logistics company from the ground up. Raymond was the type of man who never forgot where he came from. He had grown up with very little, worked multiple jobs throughout his 20s, and slowly built a company that eventually employed hundreds of people. To the outside world, the Brooks family appeared successful and united. When Naomi was 28, her mother passed away after a brief illness. The loss devastated the family. Raymond struggled with loneliness, and within a few years he remarried. The woman he married was named Vanessa. She was intelligent, charming, and confident. Friends described her as ambitious. Others used different words. What nobody realized at the time was that Vanessa had already begun planning a future that placed herself at the center of everything Raymond had spent a lifetime building. At first, Naomi tried to welcome her stepmother into the family. She believed her father deserved happiness after years of grief. Conversations stayed polite. But over time, subtle changes began appearing. Vanessa started involving herself in company matters. She insisted on attending business meetings. She encouraged Raymond to restructure certain financial arrangements. She frequently reminded people that she was only trying to help protect the family's future. Raymond trusted her. Naomi wanted to trust her too. Yet there were moments that left her uneasy. Vanessa always seemed unusually interested in ownership documents, trusts, and inheritance planning. She asked questions that felt less emotional and more strategic. Whenever Naomi mentioned her future role in the company, Vanessa would quickly change the subject. None of it seemed important at the time. Everything changed when Raymond Brooks died unexpectedly from a heart attack. One day he was discussing expansion plans with senior executives. The next day he was gone. The shock spread throughout the family and the company. Naomi felt as though the ground beneath her had disappeared. During the weeks following the funeral, she focused on grieving and helping organize her father's affairs. Vanessa focused on something else entirely. While Naomi mourned, Vanessa moved quickly. Meetings were scheduled, lawyers appeared, financial advisors arrived, documents were reviewed, decisions were made. Before Naomi fully understood what was happening, her stepmother had established herself as the primary authority overseeing much of the estate. The speed with which everything unfolded left Naomi confused. She assumed there was a reasonable explanation. There always seemed to be one. At least that is what Vanessa wanted everyone to believe. 3 weeks after the funeral, Naomi received an invitation unlike anything she had ever seen. It requested her presence at a private family gathering hosted by Vanessa. At first she assumed it concerned estate matters. Instead, it became the moment her life took a direction she never imagined. Family friends filled the room. Attorneys stood nearby. Several company executives had also been invited. Vanessa waited until everyone had arrived before making an announcement that left the room completely silent. According to Vanessa, Raymond's final wishes included a condition that Naomi had never heard before. She claimed certain assets and inheritance rights would only transfer if Naomi agreed to marry a man specifically connected to a confidential family arrangement. The statement sounded absurd. Naomi immediately questioned its legitimacy. She demanded proof. Vanessa responded by presenting documents that appeared official. Signatures were visible. Legal language filled every page. Several guests seemed confused, while others simply watched in silence. Naomi could hardly believe what she was hearing. Then Vanessa revealed the name of the man she was supposedly expected to marry. It was a name Naomi had never heard before. Elijah Carter. The mom explained why her late father would connect this man to her future. Determined to find answers, Naomi decided to locate Elijah herself. What she found only deepened the mystery. He spent most days near a church several miles outside the city. His clothing was worn. His appearance suggested someone struggling financially. Yet there was something unusual about the way people reacted to him. Security guards greeted him respectfully. Business owners occasionally stopped to speak with him. Once, Naomi watched an expensive luxury vehicle pull alongside the curb before a sharply dressed driver stepped out and handed Elijah a sealed envelope. The interaction lasted less than 30 seconds. Nobody seemed surprised. Elijah simply thanked the driver and continued walking. Naomi knew she was missing a piece of the puzzle. She just had no idea how large that missing piece truly was. To understand why Naomi Brooks found herself standing at the center of a situation that would later leave an entire community stunned, we have to go back to the months leading up to her father's death. By every outward measure, Naomi had built a respectable life. At 36 years old, she was educated, independent, and deeply involved in the company her father, Raymond Brooks, had spent decades creating. Employees respected her because she treated everyone with dignity, whether they worked in the executive offices or on the warehouse floor. Many assumed that one day she would naturally step into a leadership role within the business. Raymond certainly seemed to believe so. Friends often spoke about the close bond between father and daughter. Unlike many wealthy families where money created distance, Raymond and Naomi shared genuine trust. He frequently sought her opinion on important decisions and often told colleagues that she possessed the integrity required to protect everything he had built. Yet there was one person who never seemed comfortable with the relationship they shared. That person was Vanessa Brooks. While Naomi viewed her father's success as a responsibility, Vanessa appeared to view it as an opportunity. Vanessa smiled during family gatherings. She spoke kindly in public. She presented herself as supportive and caring. Whenever conversations turned toward inheritance, ownership, or the future of the company, Vanessa's interest seemed unusually intense. At first, Naomi dismissed the feeling. After all, Vanessa was Raymond's wife. Of course, she would be concerned about the family's future. What Naomi didn't realize was that Vanessa had already begun imagining a future where she controlled far more than anyone suspected. The day Raymond Brooks died felt unreal. One moment he was discussing expansion plans with senior executives, and the next his family was receiving devastating phone calls that no one ever expects to receive. The loss shook the company and shattered Naomi's world. Grief has a way of distorting time. Days blend together. Conversations become difficult to remember. Decisions that would normally require careful thought suddenly feel impossible to process. Naomi spent those first weeks struggling to accept that her father was truly gone. She barely slept. She avoided social events. She focused on making it through one day at a time. While she mourned, however, Vanessa moved with remarkable speed. Attorneys began appearing at the family home almost daily. Meetings were scheduled behind closed doors. Financial records were reviewed. Estate documents were examined. Whenever Naomi asked questions, she was told everything was being handled appropriately. Vanessa assured her there was nothing to worry about. Something was changing. Naomi could feel it. She just couldn't yet see the full picture. Within weeks, the situation became even more troubling. Certain family assets were frozen pending legal review. Access to accounts became restricted. Company voting structures were temporarily adjusted. Vanessa explained that these were routine measures designed to protect the estate during probate proceedings. On the surface, the explanation sounded reasonable. But Naomi couldn't ignore the growing pattern. Every temporary measure seemed to increase Vanessa's authority while reducing everyone else's influence. Slowly, Vanessa positioned herself as the primary decision-maker. Employees began reporting directly to her. Attorneys consulted her first. Financial advisors deferred to her judgment. It happened so gradually that many people barely noticed. By the time they did, Vanessa was effectively controlling nearly every major decision connected to Raymond's legacy. Naomi watched the transformation with growing concern. This wasn't how her father had operated. Raymond believed in collaboration. He trusted people. He valued transparency. Vanessa seemed interested in something entirely different. Then came the discovery that changed everything. 3 weeks after the funeral, Naomi arrived at the family home unexpectedly after realizing she had left behind several personal items. She assumed the house would be empty. Instead, she heard voices coming from her father's private study. The door was partially closed. As she approached, she recognized Vanessa's voice along with the voices of 2 attorneys. Naomi had no intention of eavesdropping. Yet the moment she heard her own name, she stopped. What she heard next sent a chill through her. One attorney asked whether the necessary documents had been finalized. Vanessa responded with complete confidence. She said that once the final arrangements were in place, Naomi would have no choice but to comply. The attorney asked whether there was any risk of resistance. Vanessa laughed softly before replying that Naomi wouldn't have enough leverage to stop what was coming. For several seconds, Naomi stood frozen outside the room. Her heart raced. Confusion quickly gave way to fear. What arrangements were they discussing? Why was her name being mentioned? And why did Vanessa sound so certain that Naomi would be powerless to resist? Naomi stepped away before she could be discovered, but the questions followed her all the way home. That night, she barely slept. She replayed every word she had heard, searching for answers. The following morning, she would receive an invitation that finally revealed part of Vanessa's plan. And when Naomi opened that envelope, she discovered something so shocking that it would change the course of her life forever. The invitation arrived less than 24 hours after Naomi Brooks overheard the conversation outside her father's study. The timing alone was enough to make her uneasy. It was delivered by courier in a sealed envelope bearing the logo of the Brooks family estate. Naomi sat at her kitchen table staring at it for several moments before finally opening it. Inside was a formal notice requesting her presence at a private reading of additional provisions contained within Raymond Brooks's will. At first, she felt a sense of relief. Perhaps this would finally explain everything. Perhaps there was a reasonable explanation for the strange behavior, the closed-door meetings, and the unsettling conversation she had overheard. Naomi wanted answers, and she believed this meeting might finally provide them. What she did not know was that the gathering had been carefully orchestrated. Every detail had been planned in advance. Every person invited had been selected for a reason. But one detail became clear very quickly. Vanessa claimed that Naomi's inheritance rights were tied to a specific condition. According to the documents being presented, Naomi would be required to enter into a marriage arrangement approved under terms established by the estate. Failure to comply would result in the forfeiture of significant financial interests connected to the Brooks family holdings. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Naomi struggled to process what she had just heard. It sounded impossible. Her father had spent his entire life encouraging her independence. He respected her judgment. He trusted her decisions. The idea that he would attempt to control who she married after his death felt completely out of character. Naomi immediately challenged the claim. She asked to review the complete documents. She requested copies for independent legal analysis. Vanessa refused both requests. She insisted that the estate's attorneys had already verified everything. The answer only increased Naomi's suspicion. As the meeting continued, Naomi noticed something else. Vanessa never allowed anyone to examine the documents closely. Whenever questions arose, she redirected the conversation. Whenever clarification was requested, she relied on broad explanations rather than specific answers. The behavior felt calculated. Naomi could see uncertainty on several faces throughout the room, yet nobody seemed willing to challenge Vanessa directly. The imbalance of power had become obvious. Vanessa controlled access to information. Vanessa controlled the attorneys. Vanessa controlled the process. By the end of the meeting, Naomi realized she was facing something much larger than a simple family disagreement. This was a coordinated effort to pressure her into accepting terms she neither understood nor trusted. When she firmly announced that she would never agree to any marriage arrangement imposed upon her, Vanessa's expression changed. The warm, professional mask disappeared for only a moment, revealing a colder side Naomi had rarely seen so openly. It lasted only seconds, but it was enough. After the meeting ended, Vanessa requested a private conversation. The two women entered a smaller office where the tension immediately became impossible to ignore. Gone was the polite tone Vanessa had used in front of the others. In its place was something far more direct. Vanessa informed Naomi that refusing the arrangement would come at a severe cost. She explained that access to inheritance funds could remain tied up indefinitely. She suggested that Naomi's future role within the company could disappear entirely. She implied that expensive legal battles could drain resources for years. Every statement carried the same message: comply or lose everything. Naomi refused to be intimidated. She told Vanessa she intended to hire independent counsel and challenge every document being presented. Vanessa responded by sliding a folder across the desk. Inside were additional legal papers bearing what appeared to be Raymond Brooks's signature. At first glance, the documents seemed authentic. Yet something about them felt wrong. Naomi couldn't explain why. She simply knew her father. The wording didn't sound like him. The conditions didn't sound like him. The entire arrangement felt manufactured. But feelings alone weren't enough to prove anything. Over the next several days, the pressure intensified. Calls from attorneys became more frequent. Estate representatives contacted Naomi repeatedly. New documents arrived almost daily. Every communication reinforced the same message. The marriage condition remained in place. Compliance would preserve her inheritance. Resistance would jeopardize it. Friends who once supported Naomi suddenly seemed hesitant to become involved. Some feared legal consequences. Others worried about being drawn into a family conflict involving millions of dollars. Slowly, Naomi found herself becoming isolated. That isolation was exactly what Vanessa wanted. The fewer allies Naomi had, the easier it would become to force her into a corner. Yet despite the growing pressure, one question remained unanswered. If Vanessa was determined to push this marriage forward, who exactly was the man at the center of it all? The answer arrived on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Another envelope appeared at Naomi's home. Unlike the previous documents, this one was elegantly designed. The paper was expensive. The lettering was formal. For a brief moment, Naomi wondered whether it might finally contain information that made sense of everything. Instead, she found herself staring at what appeared to be a wedding invitation. Her hands tightened around the paper as she read the words. The date had already been selected. The venue had already been chosen. The arrangements had already been made. Someone had planned an entire wedding without her consent. Then Naomi reached the line identifying the groom. She read the name once, then a second time, then a third. Elijah Carter. She had never heard the name before. She had never met the man. She knew absolutely nothing about him. Yet according to the documents in her hands, this complete stranger was somehow connected to the future Vanessa was trying to force upon her. And as Naomi stared at the invitation, she had no way of knowing that Elijah Carter was hiding a secret capable of bringing Vanessa's entire world crashing down. The name Elijah Carter quickly became an obsession for Naomi Brooks. For days after receiving the wedding invitation, she found herself asking the same question over and over again. Who was this man? And why had Vanessa gone to such extraordinary lengths to place him at the center of her future? The more Naomi thought about it, the less sense any of it made. Vanessa was obsessed with status, appearances, and influence. She carefully controlled how others viewed her. She surrounded herself with wealthy people and spent years cultivating connections within Atlanta's most exclusive social circles. If her goal was to humiliate Naomi, then the choice of Elijah Carter had to be intentional. There had to be something about him that served Vanessa's purpose. Naomi decided she could no longer rely on attorneys, estate representatives, or secondhand information. If she wanted answers, she would have to find Elijah herself. What began as a simple search soon became something far more unsettling. Public records revealed almost nothing. Yet one lead eventually pointed Naomi toward a neighborhood on the outskirts of the city where several residents claimed they had seen him regularly. The first time Naomi saw Elijah Carter in person, she almost questioned whether she had found the right man. He sat alone on a weathered bench near a small church that had served the local community for decades. His clothes appeared old. His shoes were worn. A backpack rested beside him. Nothing about him suggested wealth, influence, or importance. If anything, he looked like someone struggling to survive. Several people passed by without paying attention to him. Others barely glanced in his direction. Naomi remained in her car, watching from a distance. She expected something dramatic to happen. Instead, Elijah simply sat quietly, occasionally speaking with church volunteers or accepting food from local residents. The scene seemed ordinary. Yet Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't adding up. This was supposedly the man connected to a condition powerful enough to determine the fate of her inheritance. Vanessa had built an entire strategy around him. Why? What could possibly make this man important enough to justify such extreme measures? The answer remained hidden. For now, all Naomi could do was watch and wait. Over the following week, she returned repeatedly. The more she observed Elijah, the stranger the situation became. Several local residents referred to him as eccentric. Others called him crazy. One man claimed Elijah spent hours talking about business, economics, and global markets despite appearing homeless. Another insisted Elijah occasionally disappeared for days before suddenly returning without explanation. The stories varied, but they all shared one common detail. Nobody seemed to know who Elijah Carter really was. Yet as Naomi continued observing him, she began noticing moments that didn't fit the image everyone else seemed to accept. One afternoon she watched Elijah enter a nearby bank. The branch manager immediately came out from behind his desk and greeted him personally. Their conversation lasted only a few minutes, but the level of respect was impossible to miss. This wasn't how bank managers treated someone they barely knew. The interaction felt more like a meeting between equals. Naomi waited for an explanation that never came. Elijah exited the bank carrying nothing and returned to the church as though nothing unusual had happened. The incidents continued. A few days later, Naomi watched a black luxury SUV pull to the curb beside Elijah. The vehicle looked completely out of place in the neighborhood. The driver stepped out wearing an expensive tailored suit and approached Elijah with visible urgency. They exchanged a brief conversation before the driver handed him a sealed envelope. Elijah accepted it without surprise. There was no excitement, no confusion, no curiosity. He behaved as though receiving confidential deliveries from luxury vehicles was completely normal. Moments later, the SUV departed. Elijah placed the envelope inside his backpack and continued walking. Naomi sat motionless behind the steering wheel of her car, trying to make sense of what she had witnessed. Every clue seemed to contradict the one before it. Nothing aligned with the image Vanessa had presented. Nothing aligned with the image the neighborhood believed. The mystery surrounding Elijah wasn't becoming clearer. It was becoming deeper. The most surprising moment occurred several days later. Naomi had parked across the street from the church when a police cruiser pulled into the lot. At first, she worried Elijah might be in trouble. Instead, the exact opposite happened. Two officers stepped out and approached him with familiarity. One shook his hand. The other smiled and appeared genuinely pleased to see him. They spoke for several minutes before the officers returned to their vehicle and left. There was no confrontation, no questioning, no concern. The interaction resembled old acquaintances catching up after a long absence. Naomi could hardly believe what she was seeing. A man many people dismissed as homeless was being treated with unusual respect by bank managers, luxury executives, and police officers. The pieces refused to fit together. By now, one question consumed her thoughts more than any other. Who exactly was Elijah Carter? As the days passed, Naomi became increasingly determined to uncover the truth. She followed his routines. She documented his movements. She searched records late into the night. Yet every effort produced the same result. More mystery, more contradictions, more unanswered questions. Then one evening, everything changed. Elijah left the church much later than usual and began walking through downtown Atlanta. Naomi followed from a distance, careful not to attract attention. The city lights reflected against the glass towers rising above the streets as Elijah continued forward with surprising confidence. He didn't wander aimlessly. He moved with purpose. Several blocks later, he reached one of the most exclusive residential buildings in the city. Naomi immediately assumed he would continue past it. Instead, Elijah approached the entrance. Her confusion deepened when security personnel opened the doors without hesitation. They recognized him instantly. There was no request for identification. No questioning. No delay. Elijah nodded politely before stepping inside. Naomi remained frozen in her vehicle across the street. She stared at the building in disbelief. This wasn't a shelter. It wasn't a community center. It wasn't temporary housing. The tower contained multi-million-dollar penthouse residences occupied by some of the wealthiest individuals in Georgia. Nothing about the scene made sense. Naomi waited, convinced there had to be an explanation. Minutes later, a private elevator began ascending toward the uppermost floors of the building. Through the glass exterior, she watched the illuminated car move higher and higher until it disappeared near the penthouse level. Her pulse quickened. Every assumption she had made about Elijah Carter suddenly collapsed. The man sleeping near a church. The man wearing old clothes. The man people casually dismissed as homeless had just entered one of the most exclusive residential towers in the city, as if he belonged there. And for the first time, Naomi realized that Vanessa Brooks may have made a mistake far bigger than either of them understood. The only question now was what Elijah Carter was hiding, and why he had spent so much effort making sure nobody discovered the truth. The wedding was scheduled less than 3 weeks after Naomi Brooks discovered Elijah Carter's connection to the luxury penthouse tower. During those weeks, she searched desperately for answers. She hired investigators. She reviewed public records. She spoke with people who claimed to know Elijah. Yet every road seemed to end in the same place. Questions. There was still no clear explanation for why a man who spent his days near a church appeared to have access to one of Atlanta's most exclusive residential buildings. There was still no explanation for the bank manager, the luxury SUV, or the unusual respect shown by police officers. Most importantly, there was still no explanation for why Vanessa Brooks was so determined to force this marriage. Naomi considered refusing. More than once she prepared herself to walk away from everything. But every legal review pointed toward the same reality. The estate had become a maze of restrictions, challenges, and obstacles that Vanessa seemed to control from every angle. Naomi felt trapped. Invitations had been distributed throughout influential social circles. Rumors had spread for weeks. People whispered about the strange inheritance condition. They discussed the mysterious groom. Some attended out of curiosity. Others attended because they enjoyed watching public embarrassment unfold from a safe distance. By the time guests filled the ballroom, anticipation had reached extraordinary levels. Naomi felt it the moment she arrived. Conversations stopped. Eyes followed her every movement. For the first time in her life, she felt completely alone in a room filled with people. Vanessa appeared to enjoy every second of it. Throughout the evening, she moved confidently through the crowd, greeting guests and accepting compliments. Several attendees praised her for preserving what they believed were Raymond Brooks's final wishes.
Seriously,
Others expressed sympathy for Naomi in tones that felt less compassionate than curious. Vanessa responded with carefully rehearsed statements about family obligations, legacy, and responsibility. The performance was convincing enough that many people never questioned her motives. Yet behind the polished smile was a woman who believed she was witnessing the final stage of a plan years in the making. In Vanessa's mind, this ceremony represented victory. Naomi would become permanently tied to a man everyone assumed was powerless. The social humiliation would damage her credibility. Her influence within the company would weaken. Her standing within Atlanta's elite circles would suffer. Vanessa had calculated every possible outcome. At least, she believed she had. Then Elijah Carter arrived. A wave of whispers immediately spread through the room. Several guests actually turned to stare. Others pulled out their phones. Some openly laughed. Elijah looked almost exactly as he had during Naomi's first visit to the church. His suit appeared inexpensive. His shoes showed visible wear. He carried himself calmly, but his appearance contrasted sharply against the wealth surrounding him. The reaction was immediate and brutal. People exchanged jokes. Some recorded videos. Others sent messages to friends who weren't present. A few guests appeared genuinely uncomfortable with the cruelty unfolding around them, but most simply watched. Naomi felt every stare, every whisper, every laugh. She had spent weeks enduring pressure, confusion, and uncertainty. Now she stood at the center of a spectacle she never wanted. Across the room, Vanessa observed the reactions with quiet satisfaction. The smirk on her face revealed more than words ever could. This was exactly what she had hoped would happen. As the ceremony approached, Naomi struggled to hold herself together. She thought about her father. She thought about the company he had built. She thought about how different her life looked compared to only a few months earlier. There had been a time when she felt secure. There had been a time when the future seemed filled with possibilities. Now she stood moments away from marrying a man she barely knew while surrounded by people who viewed the event as entertainment. Then something unexpected happened. Moments before the ceremony began, Elijah stepped closer. The noise surrounding them seemed to fade for an instant. Naomi expected him to say nothing, perhaps offer a polite greeting. Instead, he leaned slightly toward her and spoke with a calm confidence she had never heard before. "Trust me." Naomi looked at him, uncertain whether she had heard correctly. Elijah's expression never changed. "Everything is happening exactly the way it should." The words lasted only seconds. No explanation followed. No additional details. Yet something about the way he said them felt different. There was no fear in his voice. No embarrassment. No uncertainty. While everyone else in the room viewed him as a victim of circumstance, Elijah appeared completely unbothered by the attention surrounding him. For reasons Naomi couldn't fully explain, the brief exchange stayed with her throughout the ceremony. The ceremony proceeded exactly as Vanessa intended. Documents were signed. Formalities were completed. Witnesses observed every step. By the end of the evening, the marriage was official. Applause echoed through the ballroom. Vanessa celebrated late into the evening, convinced she had secured complete control over everything Raymond Brooks left behind. But while Vanessa enjoyed what she believed was her greatest victory, a far more important chain of events had already begun moving into place. Hidden behind Elijah Carter's quiet smile was a truth so explosive that it would soon shake Atlanta's business community, expose secrets that had remained buried for years, and transform this wedding from Vanessa's greatest triumph into the beginning of her downfall. The ceremony was over. The marriage was complete. Vanessa believed she had won. The reality was that she had just taken the first step toward losing everything. For most people, the wedding would have marked the end of the story. Naomi Brooks assumed it was supposed to mark the end of hers. Vanessa Brooks certainly believed it did. In the days following the ceremony, Vanessa moved through Atlanta's business circles with renewed confidence. She attended meetings she once had no authority to lead. She spoke publicly about protecting the Brooks family legacy. She presented herself as the woman who had successfully carried out Raymond Brooks's final wishes. To outside observers, it appeared that everything had gone according to plan. Naomi had married Elijah Carter. The inheritance dispute seemed resolved. The public spectacle had ended. Yet beneath the surface, something strange was happening. The more time Naomi spent around Elijah, the more impossible it became to believe the story everyone else accepted. Every day revealed another piece of evidence suggesting Elijah Carter was hiding a life completely different from the one he allowed the world to see. One evening she overheard a discussion involving a major corporate acquisition. Several days later, local business publications reported developments involving the same company. Another conversation centered around real estate holdings and market shifts. Within weeks, substantial transactions connected to those sectors appeared in public records. Elijah never bragged. He never explained. He simply carried on as though these conversations were entirely ordinary. Naomi found herself asking the same question repeatedly. Why would powerful executives seek advice from a man everyone believed was homeless? Naomi began conducting a deeper investigation. This time she stopped focusing on Elijah's public identity and started following the financial trail. What she discovered would change everything. Late at night, she reviewed corporate filings, ownership structures, business registrations, and investment records. At first, the information seemed unrelated. Various companies appeared connected through layers of trusts, holding groups, and investment entities. Most people would have given up after encountering such complexity. Naomi didn't. She continued searching. Slowly, patterns emerged. Certain names appeared repeatedly. Certain addresses appeared across multiple filings. Certain signatures surfaced on documents connected to vastly different industries. The deeper she looked, the more she realized someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to conceal the true scale of what they owned. Weeks of investigation eventually led Naomi to a collection of records that connected everything. One company led to another. then another, then another. Technology firms, real estate holdings, logistics operations, energy investments, healthcare ventures, financial services organizations. The list seemed endless. Every new discovery expanded the picture. What initially appeared to be a handful of successful businesses turned out to be part of an enormous network of corporate interests stretching across multiple states and industries. The ownership structures were sophisticated, but they all pointed toward the same conclusion. Hidden beneath layers of legal entities and private trusts was a single controlling interest. And that interest belonged to Elijah Carter. Naomi spent hours reviewing the evidence because she couldn't believe what she was seeing. The numbers were staggering. Together, they formed a business empire far larger than anything Raymond Brooks had ever built. The realization left Naomi speechless. The man sleeping near a church. The man people mocked during the wedding. The man Vanessa had used as a tool for public humiliation was not poor. He was not powerless. He was not dependent on anyone. Elijah Carter was a billionaire. Suddenly, every strange encounter made sense. The bank manager's respect. The luxury SUV. The confidential envelopes. The police officers who greeted him like an old friend. The private security. The executives seeking his guidance. None of it had been random. The clues had been there from the beginning. Naomi simply lacked the final piece necessary to understand them. Now she had it. The mystery surrounding Elijah's wealth had been solved. Yet a much larger question immediately took its place. If Elijah Carter possessed this level of wealth, influence, and power, why was he living the way he did? Why spend his days near a church wearing old clothes? Why allow people to believe he was homeless? Why accept ridicule during the wedding without defending himself? Most importantly, why agree to become part of Vanessa Brooks's plan when he clearly had the resources to avoid it entirely? Naomi had finally uncovered the truth about Elijah's fortune. What she still didn't understand was his purpose. And the answer to that question would reveal a connection to Raymond Brooks that stretched back years and expose a secret Vanessa never saw coming. Naomi knew she was finally close to the truth. Every major mystery in her life now appeared connected to a single person. Her late father, Raymond Brooks. The deeper she investigated, the more frequently Raymond's name surfaced in places she never expected. Old corporate records, archived business filings, investment agreements, private correspondence. At first, the connections seemed small. Then they became impossible to ignore. Long before Vanessa Brooks entered the picture, Raymond Brooks and Elijah Carter had known each other. Not casually, not professionally. They shared a relationship built over many years. One that remained hidden from almost everyone around them. The revelation came through a collection of documents Naomi discovered inside a private storage file connected to one of Raymond's older business ventures. Many of the records dated back more than a decade. Some contained financial information. Others contained personal notes and correspondence. As Naomi carefully reviewed the material, a completely different version of her father's life began to emerge. Long before Elijah became the mysterious figure people saw near the church, he had already established himself as an extraordinary entrepreneur. While most investors focused on obvious opportunities, Elijah specialized in identifying businesses others overlooked. His ability to recognize potential where others saw failure earned him a reputation among a small circle of respected business leaders. Raymond Brooks happened to be one of them. Their first meeting occurred years earlier during a logistics conference. What began as a simple conversation evolved into a friendship based on mutual respect. Raymond admired Elijah's intelligence. Elijah admired Raymond's integrity. Over time, they collaborated on several investments, shared ideas, and developed a level of trust rarely seen in business. Yet despite their success, they intentionally kept their relationship private. Neither man cared about publicity. They valued results far more than recognition. As Naomi continued reading, she learned something even more surprising. Raymond trusted Elijah in ways he trusted almost no one else. Several letters revealed deeply personal conversations between the two men. They discussed family, legacy, responsibility. They discussed fears about what might happen to the people they loved after they were gone. One letter written several years before Raymond's death immediately captured Naomi's attention. In it, Raymond expressed growing concern about Vanessa. The language was careful, But the message was unmistakable. He believed Vanessa's interest in family finances had become excessive. He worried that her priorities were changing. He feared she viewed his wealth differently than he did. The letter stopped short of making direct accusations, but the concern was obvious. More importantly, Elijah's response suggested he shared those concerns. Together, the two men began discussing ways to protect Naomi and preserve Raymond's legacy should anything happen in the future. What Naomi uncovered next changed everything she believed about the inheritance dispute. Hidden among the documents was evidence of a long-term legal strategy developed years before Raymond's death. The plan wasn't designed to punish Naomi. It wasn't designed to control her future. It was designed to protect her from people who might attempt to manipulate her after Raymond was gone. The strategy involved trusts, business structures, ownership provisions, and a series of legal safeguards intended to prevent any single individual from gaining complete control of the Brooks estate. Raymond knew that money often changed people. He understood how quickly greed could emerge when large fortunes became involved. Most importantly, he knew Naomi's greatest vulnerability was her trust in others. He wanted to ensure she would have someone capable of protecting her interests if circumstances turned against her. That person was Elijah Carter. Suddenly, the impossible began making sense. Vanessa had spent months presenting herself as the architect of the marriage arrangement. She wanted Naomi to believe the requirement existed solely because of her influence over the estate. In reality, the truth was far more complicated. The marriage provision had indeed existed, but it wasn't Vanessa's creation. Raymond's chosen protector was Elijah Carter. The arrangement wasn't about romance. It wasn't about control. It was a protection mechanism built by a father who feared what might happen after he was gone. For several moments after discovering the documents, Naomi simply sat in silence. Her emotions collided all at once. Grief, relief, anger, confusion. For months, she had believed her father had somehow abandoned the principles he spent his life teaching her. Now she realized the exact opposite was true. Raymond had anticipated danger. He had seen warning signs years earlier, and he had quietly built a safeguard intended to protect the daughter he loved. Yet the most astonishing part was still to come. The documents revealed that Vanessa had never fully understood what she was dealing with. She believed she had manipulated the estate for her own benefit. She believed she had weaponized the marriage requirement against Naomi. In reality, she had unknowingly activated a plan designed specifically to expose anyone attempting to seize control of Raymond's legacy through deception. But as Naomi continued reviewing the remaining files, one final discovery stopped her cold. At the bottom of the collection sat a sealed envelope addressed in Raymond Brooks's handwriting. It had never been opened. It contained a personal message intended for Naomi alone. The envelope carried a notation indicating it should only be delivered if specific conditions within the estate had been triggered. Those conditions had now been met. Naomi stared at the envelope for several seconds before carefully lifting it into her hands. Whatever waited inside represented the last words her father had chosen to leave behind. And as she prepared to break the seal, she had no idea that the message would reveal one final secret capable of bringing Vanessa Brooks's entire world crashing down. The letter Raymond Brooks left behind changed everything. For Naomi Brooks, it was more than a message from her late father. It was the missing piece that connected every mystery, every manipulation, and every decision made over the previous months. Raymond's words confirmed what the documents had already suggested. He had grown concerned about Vanessa Brooks long before his death. He had noticed inconsistencies. He had observed behavior that troubled him. Most importantly, he had quietly begun documenting those concerns. The letter explained that if certain legal safeguards were ever activated, Naomi should immediately trust Elijah Carter and follow the instructions contained within a separate collection of records prepared years earlier. Raymond described Elijah as the one person he believed could protect both Naomi and the company if events unfolded in the worst possible way. Reading those words brought Naomi to tears. For months, she had felt abandoned by the father she loved. Now she understood that even after death, Raymond had been trying to protect her. What she didn't yet realize was that the evidence he left behind was about to trigger one of the most devastating legal collapses Atlanta's business community had seen in years. Within weeks, a formal legal challenge was filed against Vanessa Brooks. What began as a dispute over estate management rapidly expanded into something far more serious. Independent forensic accountants were brought in to review financial records connected to the Brooks estate. Outside attorneys began examining transactions that occurred both before and after Raymond's death. Several individuals who had remained silent suddenly became willing to cooperate. The investigation uncovered inconsistencies that could no longer be explained away as simple mistakes. Missing funds, altered records, unauthorized transfers, documents that appeared legitimate on the surface but collapsed under closer scrutiny. Each discovery strengthened a growing theory that Vanessa had spent years positioning herself to gain control of assets she was never intended to control. As evidence accumulated, the legal battle moved toward a courtroom confrontation that would determine the future of everything Raymond Brooks had built. The proceedings attracted enormous attention. Business leaders followed developments closely. Local media reported every major filing. Former employees of the Brooks Company watched anxiously as new revelations emerged almost weekly. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense from the very beginning. Vanessa entered each hearing projecting confidence. She insisted she had acted only in accordance with Raymond's wishes. Her attorneys argued that every decision had been made legally and responsibly. For a brief period, it seemed possible that the truth would remain buried beneath years of paperwork and complex financial arrangements. Then Elijah Carter's legal team introduced evidence that changed the entire case. Corporate records were presented showing ownership movements that contradicted Vanessa's claims. Financial trails revealed transfers linked to accounts she previously denied controlling. Internal communications surfaced that raised serious questions about decisions made immediately after Raymond's death. One revelation followed another, each more damaging than the last. Then came the documents that shattered Vanessa's defense. Independent experts testified that several signatures appearing on critical estate records showed strong indicators of manipulation. Advanced examinations revealed inconsistencies in timing, formatting, and execution. What Vanessa had spent months presenting as legitimate instructions from Raymond Brooks now appeared increasingly questionable. The courtroom grew silent as specialists explained their findings. Jurors listened carefully. Attorneys reviewed exhibits. Even experienced observers seemed stunned by the scale of what was being uncovered. For Naomi, the moment felt surreal. Every doubt she had carried since her father's death was finally being validated. The documents she always suspected were wrong were now being dismantled piece by piece before everyone to see. The testimony continued for days. Former advisors described unusual pressure placed upon them after Raymond's death. Financial experts outlined asset movements that diverted significant resources away from their intended destinations. Longtime employees recounted conversations they had previously been afraid to discuss publicly. Each witness added another layer to the picture. Together, their accounts painted a story of calculated manipulation fueled by greed and opportunity. The evidence suggested that Vanessa believed she could gradually reshape the estate while controlling access to information. She assumed nobody possessed enough knowledge to challenge her effectively. What she failed to understand was that Raymond Brooks had anticipated the possibility years earlier. Every safeguard he created, every document he prepared, every contingency he established had been designed for exactly this moment. Then came the emotional turning point that changed everything. During one of the final hearings, Elijah Carter's attorneys presented records detailing the original purpose of the marriage provision. For the first time, the full truth became public. The courtroom learned that the arrangement Vanessa had used to humiliate Naomi was never intended as a punishment. It was a protection mechanism created by Raymond Brooks himself. The strategy had been carefully structured to activate if certain patterns of misconduct emerged within the estate. More importantly, the provision relied upon Elijah Carter because Raymond trusted him completely. As the explanation unfolded, Vanessa's expression began to change. Slowly, the reality became impossible for her to ignore. The very mechanism she believed she had weaponized against Naomi had actually been designed to expose people behaving exactly as she had. Every move she made had pushed events closer to the outcome Raymond intended. Every attempt to seize greater control had triggered additional safeguards. Every effort to manipulate the system had strengthened the case against her. For the first time since the legal battle began, Vanessa appeared genuinely shaken. The confidence that had defined her for months started disappearing. She realized she had misunderstood the game entirely. She thought she was controlling the board. She thought she was directing the outcome. In reality, she had been moving through a structure carefully designed years before she ever recognized it existed. The marriage, the trusts, the ownership provisions, the legal triggers, they all formed part of a larger strategy built by Raymond Brooks and protected by Elijah Carter. Vanessa had spent months celebrating what she believed was victory. Now she was forced to watch that victory unravel in front of an audience larger than she ever imagined. As the final evidence was presented, the outcome became unavoidable. Claims of fraud gained overwhelming support. Asset diversions were documented. Forged records were exposed. Financial misconduct was traced through years of transactions. The estate Vanessa fought so hard to control was removed from her influence. Authority shifted. Assets were recovered. Legal judgments followed. Everything she spent years pursuing began slipping away. Meanwhile, Naomi sat quietly absorbing the weight of everything that had happened. She had entered the courtroom searching for justice. What she received was something even more powerful. The truth. The complete truth. About her father. About Vanessa. About Elijah Carter. And just when it seemed the story had finally reached its conclusion, one final revelation emerged that nobody saw coming. A revelation connected not to the estate, not to the courtroom, and not to Vanessa's downfall, but to the real reason Elijah Carter had spent years hiding from the world in the first place. For most people following the story, the courtroom battle felt like the ending. Vanessa Brooks had been exposed. The estate had been protected. Raymond Brooks's legacy had been preserved. Naomi Brooks finally understood the truth her father had spent years trying to safeguard. Yet one question remained unanswered. It was the same question that first entered Naomi's mind when she watched Elijah Carter sitting quietly near that church bench months earlier. Why? Why would a billionaire choose to live as though he had nothing? Why spend years allowing strangers to underestimate him? Why accept ridicule, judgment, and humiliation when he possessed enough wealth to command respect almost anywhere in the world? The answer arrived during a private conversation shortly after the legal proceedings concluded. For the first time since they met, Elijah chose to tell Naomi everything. Years earlier, long before he became one of the most successful investors in the country, Elijah experienced a loss that changed the course of his life. The person closest to him was his mother. She had raised him with values that had little to do with money and everything to do with character. She taught him that the way people treat those who appear powerless reveals more about them than any speech, title, or public reputation ever could. When she passed away, Elijah found himself questioning many of the relationships around him. As his wealth grew, he noticed something troubling. More and more people seemed interested in what he owned rather than who he was. Conversations changed when people learned about his success. Friendships suddenly felt transactional. Opportunities appeared where none existed before. Compliments became easier to find. Trust became harder. Over time, Elijah realized he could no longer tell who genuinely cared about him and who cared only about his money. That realization led him to make a decision few people could understand. He gradually stepped away from public attention. He simplified his appearance. He spent time among ordinary communities where nobody knew his background. He listened more than he spoke. He observed how people treated one another when there was nothing obvious to gain. Some ignored him completely. Others mocked him. A few treated him as though he didn't matter. Yet every so often, he encountered individuals who offered kindness without expecting anything in return. People who showed respect without knowing who stood in front of them. Those moments became far more valuable to him than any business success. They reminded him of the lessons his mother spent years teaching him. Wealth could purchase many things, but it could never purchase genuine character. As Elijah shared his story, Naomi began understanding why Raymond Brooks trusted him so completely. Raymond had seen beyond the unusual lifestyle. He had recognized a man guided by principles rather than appearances. A man who valued integrity more than status. A man capable of protecting others because he understood what truly mattered. Then Elijah revealed something that left Naomi speechless. Long before the marriage arrangement was ever activated, Raymond had spoken often about his daughter. He described her kindness, her work ethic, and her ability to treat people with dignity regardless of their position in life. At first, Elijah had simply listened. Over time, he became curious. Then, after meeting Naomi and observing her actions firsthand, he discovered Raymond had been right. During every encounter before she learned the truth about his wealth, Naomi treated him with respect. She questioned him. She investigated him. She challenged him. But she never looked down on him. Even when she believed he had nothing, she treated him as a human being deserving of dignity. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The journey that began with suspicion, confusion, and humiliation had led them to a truth neither could have anticipated. Naomi realized that the greatest inheritance Raymond Brooks left behind was not money, property, or ownership shares. It was wisdom. He understood that fortunes could disappear. Companies could rise and fall. Public reputations could change overnight. Character was different. Character endured. It revealed itself when circumstances became difficult. It revealed itself when nobody was watching. And in the end, it revealed exactly who people truly were. Vanessa Brooks spent years believing wealth gave her power. She spent years chasing control, influence, and ownership. Yet the very qualities she pursued ultimately became the reason for her downfall. Meanwhile, the man everyone dismissed as a beggar possessed more wealth than anyone imagined and never felt the need to prove it. The contrast couldn't have been clearer. One person devoted their life to appearances. The other devoted their life to understanding people beyond appearances. And that difference changed everything. So now we'd love to hear from you. If you were Naomi Brooks, would you have agreed to the marriage? And if you discovered someone you thought was homeless was actually a billionaire, would it change the way you treated them? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos.